Welcome to Karma Chronicles. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin.
The roast was dry, but that wasn't the problem. The problem was my dad sitting across the table, shaking his head as he stabbed another bite like it had offended him personally. "So, Serena," he said, swallowing hard, "still doing that tree-hugging spreadsheet job?" My jaw clenched before I even looked up. "My job's in environmental engineering, Dad, not spreadsheets." He waved his fork. Right. Lots of paperwork to save the planet. Sounds thrilling." Laughter popped off from the side. My Uncle Gary. "Hey, as long as someone's keeping track of the dirt." Then my mom chimed in, smiling like it was a joke. "I always thought you'd end up doing something more impactful. You were so good at math. Could have been a doctor, you know." I didn't say anything. I just kept cutting into my food, counting each bite like it might help me get through the night faster. Quick note, before we go further, share which city or country you're watching from. I hadn't been back home to Westbury, Illinois in almost a year, but here I was, sitting at the same dining room table I grew up eating at, being treated like a high school dropout who wandered into a grown-up dinner. They didn't care about the last 2 years I spent living out of a duffel bag, flying between project sites, crawling through marshes, writing environmental impact reports that ended up saving communities from chemical runoff. They didn't care about the award I got from the State Department or the lecture I gave at Berkeley. To them, I was still just the girl who played with frogs in the backyard and ruined her shoes. "I read something about those environmental jobs getting outsourced," Uncle Gary said, sipping his beer. "Guess that's not your problem." Yet, Mom gave him a look, but she didn't say he was wrong. I pressed my tongue to the roof of my mouth and kept chewing. My dad leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Just seems like a lot of noise for not much reward," he said. "At least when I worked at Lockridge, I knew what success looked like. Titles, bonuses, leadership, that's how you build something real." I stared down at my plate, my grip tightening around the fork. I'd built things. Whole ecosystems were better because I showed up. But sure, let's pretend the only work that matters happens in a suit behind a desk. I looked around the table. Same wallpaper, same casserole dishes, same narrow view of success. They didn't ask about my job. Not really. Just circled around it, poking it like it was some phase I'd grow out of. I swallowed hard, stood up, and started gathering plates. I didn't say a word. Let them enjoy their dinner. I had work that actually mattered. I dumped the plates in the sink and headed upstairs before anyone could start another round of passive-aggressive small talk. My old bedroom door creaked just like I remembered. Everything inside looked frozen in time. The walls were still that pale purple I begged for in 6th grade. My junior year science fair trophy was still on the shelf, the one I won for designing a cheap water filtration model. Next to it, a faded photo of me in braces holding a frog. God, I used to think that little nerd would grow up and change the world. I sat on the edge of the bed and kicked off my shoes. The mattress felt thinner than I remembered. I grabbed my phone and flipped through notifications out of habit. At the top, Project Sierra, proposal approved. Full green light. More info to follow. I stared at it for a second, then locked my screen. Not tonight. A floorboard creaked downstairs. Someone laughed faintly, probably Mom and Uncle Gary talking about the neighbors again. Their world never changed, just rotated between local gossip, TV shows, and mild judgment. Mine spun faster, harder. I lay back, staring at the ceiling fan wobbling overhead. This house used to be my whole world. Now it felt like a cardboard cutout of something I used to believe in. My phone buzzed again. Lisa voicemail, 7:42, and PM Lisa was my old boss. The woman who once tore my first impact report to shreds in front of the entire project team, then 2 years later handed me my first award in DC. I played the message on speaker and let it echo through the room. "Serena, hey, I just heard from the review board. They've put your name in for the lead analyst spot on the federal climate audit. It's early, but I think it's real. Call me when you're ready to talk." I didn't call. I didn't text back. I just put the phone face down on the nightstand and pulled the blanket over my chest. I was tired. Not just sleep-deprived, but wrung out. Everyone back in the office saw me as this unstoppable machine. The woman who flew 12 hours, slept 4, and rolled into meetings with binders full of data and a plan that actually made sense. But tonight, I didn't want to be a powerhouse. I just wanted to stop fighting for a minute. The room smelled like old paper and cheap perfume. I spotted my college acceptance letter pinned to the corkboard. Caltech, the one that Dad barely acknowledged until it made the neighborhood Christmas letter. He told everyone I got a scholarship for science stuff. He never said I graduated with honors. or that I was invited to consult on one of the first cross-border sustainability initiatives between the US and Brazil. He just nodded when I showed him the photos from the Amazon. "Looks hot," he'd said. I turned onto my side and stared at the desk where I used to build paper models of bridges and levees. My first homemade microscope kit was still on the bottom shelf. I built my whole life out of those tiny obsessions: bugs, algae, river flow patterns. Every time someone rolled their eyes or told me to be realistic, I pushed harder. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. I wanted them to be proud. That was the original plan. But somewhere along the way, the dream shifted. They didn't get it. They never would. I grabbed my pillow and pulled it tight under my chin. I was too wired to sleep, but too drained to do anything else. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. Inside, my mind wouldn't shut up. I had 2 nominations pending, 4 open projects, and a team depending on me back in Seattle. And yet, here I was, in my childhood bed, wishing for one damn night where I didn't have to carry the weight of being impressive. I wasn't asking for praise. I just wanted peace. My eyes finally drifted shut around 2 in the morning, and the last thing I remember thinking was that the only person I ever needed to prove anything to was done proving it. The vibration jolted me awake. I fumbled for my phone in the dark, blinking through the blur. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I saw the country code, international. I swiped to answer. "Hello?" My voice was low, groggy. "Serena, it's Carson." That woke me up fast. I sat up, heartbeat suddenly in my throat. "Carson, it's 2 in the morning here." "I know, sorry, I wouldn't have called unless it was big." "You got a minute?" I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my toes touching the cold floor. "Yeah, I'm up." He didn't waste time. "You've been shortlisted for the Terra Lead Initiative. Global scope, intergovernmental, cross-agency coordination. You'd be the first woman to lead it." I couldn't speak. My jaw actually locked up for a second. What? You serious? As a heart attack. They were reviewing legacy impact metrics from the Amazon deployment. Your name came up 3 times in the exec summaries. Someone flagged it. I vouched. They're impressed. I stood up and walked to the window, pressing my forehead against the glass. The backyard was blacked out, except for the motion light flickering above the garage. "This is big," I finally said. "This is historic," Carson corrected. "You'd be representing North America's contribution to one of the largest environmental frameworks in modern policy. And they're not just offering you a seat at the table, they want you at the head." I laughed once. It wasn't joy. It was disbelief. "I'm not even sure I've earned that." "You've more than earned it. You've bled for this work, Serena, and they noticed." "We noticed?" He paused, and the silence filled every corner of that little bedroom like smoke. "I know this is a lot," he said. "But you need to start thinking like someone who leads, not someone who waits to be invited." That one hit deep. "I'll call you back tomorrow," I said. "I just need a minute." "Of course, but don't sit on it too long." The press wheels are already turning. Clock's ticking. When the call ended, I didn't move. I didn't even sit back down. I just stood there, holding the phone like it was a grenade that hadn't gone off yet. Terra Lead. Jesus. I'd read about it in briefings. Heard whispers about how they'd been searching for someone with field experience and international credibility. It never occurred to me they'd look here, at me. I glanced at the door. The hallway was still. No sounds from the bathroom, no creaks on the stairs. Just the sound of a house full of people who had no idea what just landed in my lap. Would they even believe me if I told them? Or would they just blink and ask what it paid? I sat on the edge of the bed, my legs bouncing. I wanted to scream and laugh and maybe throw something. Part of me wanted to run downstairs and yell, "See? This matters." But another part, the tired part, wanted to wait. Wait until it was in writing, until it was on paper with my name stamped across the top in bold black ink. Then maybe, they'd stop looking at me like I was wasting my potential. I leaned back against the headboard, still holding the phone. This could change everything. And somehow, I wasn't sure I was ready for that. I came down for dinner wearing a navy blouse and black slacks. Not dressy, not casual, just clean, sharp, neutral. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just didn't want to give them something else to pick at. The table was already set. Mom had made meatloaf this time. She gave me a quick glance when I sat down, then passed the mashed potatoes like it was any other night. "So guess who's pregnant again?" she said, aiming the question at no one in particular. "Emily from the bank. That'll make 3, and she's not even 30. Uncle Gary chuckled. "They're trying to keep up with the McAllisters. Poor guy's gonna need a second job just to pay for diapers. I nodded and spooned some potatoes onto my plate. Same conversation, different day. My dad cut into the meatloaf and looked at me like he'd been holding something in all afternoon. I read something yesterday, he said. Big companies pulling out of the whole green initiative stuff. Too expensive, can't keep up. I didn't respond. He kept going. I mean, the economy's what matters, right? People need jobs, not lectures about trees. Uncle Gary smirked. Well, at least Serena's got job security. As long as people keep polluting, she'll have something to do. I bit down on my tongue. My fork scraped against the plate louder than I meant. Mom jumped in like she always did when tension started to bubble. Have you thought about settling down, Serena? You know, like your cousin Amanda? She's doing so well. Married, 2 kids, and she just started selling real estate on the side. I dropped my fork. I don't want to sell houses, or settle, or follow some checklist just to make everyone more comfortable with how I live. Mom blinked. I didn't mean it like that. Dad looked up, eyebrows raised. Then what are you aiming for? Floating around project to project forever? I took a breath. Actually, I got a call last night. From Carson. I've been nominated to lead the Terra Lead initiative. The room froze. Even Gary stopped chewing. I kept my eyes on my dad. It's a global leadership role, full intergovernmental coordination. It's the biggest environmental initiative in the last decade, and I'd be the first woman to lead it. Silence. Mom finally blinked and looked at my dad. He was staring at his plate. Uncle Gary cleared his throat. Well, that's something. My father muttered, well, that's unexpected. I felt my chest tighten. Not pride, not joy. Just that same old weight I'd been carrying since I was 16, and he told me science fairs were for kids who didn't make varsity. I thought you'd at least say congratulations, I said. He looked up. I don't say things just to say them, Serena. You know that. I stood. Yeah, I know exactly what you say and when you say it. I grabbed my plate, barely touched, and walked it to the sink. Behind me, I heard my mom sigh and the clink of forks on plates starting up again like nothing had happened. Let them eat in peace. I had bigger things to think about. I stepped out the back door, letting the screen slam behind me. The porch light flickered, then stayed on. Crickets filled the silence like static, and the air smelled like old grass and engine oil. I sank down on the steps, elbows on my knees. The kitchen window behind me clattered open a minute later. I didn't turn around. Footsteps, slow and heavy, came down the porch. Then the creak of the wood as someone sat next to me. My dad. He handed me a cold bottle, without a word. We sat like that for a while. No talk, just drinking in silence like 2 people waiting for a storm to pass. You really think you can lead that project? He finally asked, still looking out at the yard. I took a sip. Yeah, I do. He nodded once, slow. It's a big deal, lot of pressure. I've handled pressure before. He grunted. Yeah, I guess you have. The silence stretched again. You remember that summer when you tried to clean out the creek behind the park? He said. You were what, 12? 11? You came home covered in muck. Mom was furious. I smirked. Yeah, but I found a dead turtle full of cigarette butts. That was my first science presentation. I made Amanda cry. He let out a short laugh through his nose. She still talks about that. I leaned back on my palms. That was the first time I realized people didn't care until they were forced to look. So I started making them look. Dad didn't say anything for a while. He just picked at the label on his bottle. You always had this obsession, he finally said, with fixing things that weren't yours to fix. They became mine. Once I saw them, they were mine. He nodded again, slower this time. You know, I said, I used to think if I worked hard enough, got enough awards, someone in this family would finally say they were proud of me. His jaw tightened. It's not that we're not proud, Serena. It's just hard to wrap our heads around what you do. Why? Because it doesn't come with a corner office and a retirement plan? Because it's not what I would have chosen. That's all. I looked at him. I didn't need you to choose it. I just needed you to respect that I did. He met my eyes, that rare, clear look he only gave when he had nothing else to deflect with. I don't understand half the stuff you do, he said, but I know you haven't backed down from anything since you were a kid. That means something. I raised the bottle halfway in the air. I'll take that as a halfway. I'm proud. He shook his head, a tiny grin pulling at the edge of his mouth. Don't push it. We sat a while longer, the porch light humming above us, the rest of the house quiet. For once, it didn't feel like a war zone. He didn't say I was ready. He didn't say I deserved it. But he stayed. He listened. And maybe that was the most I was ever gonna get. I tipped back the bottle, finished the last sip, and stood up. "I've got work to do," I said, heading for the door. I hadn't even shut the door behind me before my phone lit up like a pinball machine. By the time I got to the kitchen, I had 4 missed calls, 12 texts, and 2 voicemails. I opened one of the messages from a colleague in Seattle. "It's out. You're everywhere. Congrats, boss." I pulled up a news alert. Serena Vaughn, nominated to lead Global Terra Lead Environmental Initiative. My face right under the headline, photo from last year's Sustainability Summit. Hair frizzed out from jungle humidity, face sunburned, but smiling like I'd just survived something I wasn't supposed to. More messages poured in. Lisa, Carson, a UN advisor I'd met once at a conference. Emails, LinkedIn DMS. Former interns tagging me in posts. People I hadn't heard from in years suddenly remembered who I was. And then, silence from the living room. I peeked around the corner. Dad was on the couch, the local news rolling across the screen. The anchor read my name like she didn't know how to pronounce it. He didn't say a word, just sipped his coffee and stared at the screen. No reaction. No, that's my daughter. Not even a grunt. Mom passed behind him with a laundry basket. She looked over once, paused like she might say something, then kept walking. I stood there, half hidden by the hallway, heart pounding. I didn't know what I was expecting. A round of applause? A toast? Even a well done? Instead, the house felt like someone had died. All day, the noise outside kept getting louder. Articles, interviews, social posts. And inside, the silence was deafening. Dinner came, same time as always. Meatloaf leftovers, a new salad. My dad at the head of the table, Mom to his right, Uncle Gary across from me again. Nobody mentioned the news, no gossip about the project, no questions, not even curiosity. I stabbed at my salad while Gary talked about some kid from town who just bought a hardware franchise. "Smart move, bricks and mortar still matter," he said, eyeing me like he was trying to make a point. I pushed my plate back, cleared my throat. "It's official." They all looked up. "The Terra lead position, it's confirmed. I'll be heading to Seattle next month once the transition paperwork clears." Mom blinked. "Seattle?" "It's the main office. I'll be leading from there." Uncle Gary nodded slowly, still chewing. "Big city." Dad wiped his mouth with a napkin. "Lot of rain up there." I stared at him. "That's what you have to say?" He leaned back. "I'm just making an observation." I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping hard against the tile. "Jesus, you don't even have to mean it. Just lie. Just say something." He looked me in the eye for the first time all night. "You want a parade, Serena? Number I want basic human decency." He shook his head, then looked down at his plate again like it had the answers. Mom reached for my hand across the table but stopped halfway and folded her napkin instead. "I'm not asking for approval," I said. "I already took the job." I walked out before they could pretend they cared. The hallway felt like a tunnel. My phone buzzed in my pocket again. Another congratulations. Probably someone else I barely remembered. I went upstairs, shut the door behind me, and sat on the edge of the bed. For once, the buzz of success didn't hit. Not because it wasn't real, but because the people I thought I wanted to impress the most couldn't even fake it. And I wasn't sure if I should be angry or just done trying. I didn't sleep much, maybe a couple hours, tops. My mind wouldn't shut off. Every headline, every comment, every silence from across the dinner table playing on a loop. At 6 a.m., I laced up my running shoes and slipped out the front door. The street was dead quiet, just the sound of my own breath and the dull thud of sneakers hitting cracked pavement. I stuck to the same route I used to bike as a kid, past the elementary school, down by the drainage ditch I once called a stream, then up the hill by the old grocery store that turned into a vape shop. Westbury hadn't changed, but I had. Every step felt like shaking something off. The doubt, the tension, the weight of having to prove myself in a house where no one cared what I did unless it fit inside a box they understood. I didn't run to feel better. I ran to survive mornings like this. By the time I got back, the sun was creeping over the neighbor's roof and my shirt was soaked through. I kicked off my shoes at the door and walked into the kitchen. Dad was there, alone. He stood by the window in his flannel robe, staring out at the backyard like something might finally grow out there. His hand wrapped around a coffee mug, same one he'd used since I was a kid, chipped on the rim, faded Lockridge logo. He didn't look at me, but he didn't leave either. I walked over to the counter, poured myself a cup, and leaned against the fridge. Neither of us said anything for a while, just two people holding coffee like shields. Then he asked, "You sure about this?" I didn't flinch. "Yeah, I'm sure." He nodded, still facing the window. "You know I never got it. What you do?" I stayed quiet. "Wasn't the kind of work we were taught to chase," he went on. "Especially not for girls. When I was growing up, you went to school, got a job with a title, clocked in, clocked out, provided. That was the gold standard." "That's not enough for me," I said. "It never was." He took a sip of coffee. "I know. That's what made it hard." Now he looked at me, not with judgment, not with pride, just truth. "I was disappointed," he said. "Not because you failed, because you didn't follow the script. And I didn't know how to handle that." I gripped my mug tighter. "But I watched you," he continued. "Not just this week, over the years. You didn't wait for anyone to hand you something. You carved your own road. I may not understand it, but I see it now." He paused. "You're tougher than I ever gave you credit for." It wasn't a full apology, but it wasn't nothing. "Thanks," I said, swallowing hard. "But I didn't need credit. I needed space to be who I am." He nodded again. I didn't know how to give that. We stood there, shoulder to shoulder, coffee cooling in our hands. No hugs, no grand speeches. Just a man finally meeting his daughter where she stood. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. By the time my plane touched down in Seattle, my shoulders felt lighter. Not because anything dramatic happened. Nothing changed overnight. No hugs in the driveway. No teary goodbye at the airport. But I left that house knowing I didn't need anything else from them. Not anymore. The office was tucked into the top floor of a clean steel and glass building downtown. Minimalist, modern, full of windows and filtered light. My name was already on the schedule board outside the conference room. Lead strategist, Terra Lead Initiative. I walked through the front doors, badge clipped, laptop under my arm, past the glass walls and hushed conversations. Nobody clapped or threw confetti, but heads turned, people nodded. A few smiled like they already knew who I was. I kept walking, calm and steady, all the way to the head of the table. 10 chairs, 3 department heads, 2 legal observers, 1 UN liaison dialing in remotely. This was it. Real stakes, real influence. No one here cared what my father thought of my career. They cared about outcomes. I sat down, opened my laptop, cleared my throat. "Let's begin." The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. We talked climate modeling, logistics, agency coordination, and funding gaps. I led every discussion, not because I had something to prove, but because I was the one who knew how to drive this thing forward. Afterward, I stepped into my new office. Big windows, corner view, a little too quiet. I dropped my bag, leaned against the desk, and pulled out my phone. 24 unread messages, but one stood out. "Mom, your father saw your interview. He didn't say much, but he watched the whole thing. He's proud of you, in his own way." I stared at it, thumb hovering over the screen. I didn't reply. Not yet. I slid the phone into my pocket and looked out the window. Traffic buzzed below. People moved in every direction, fast, focused, relentless. I wasn't the girl trying to impress anyone anymore. I was the one making the calls. The quiet filled the room again, but this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. I turned back to my desk and opened my laptop, already halfway through drafting a proposal for Phase 1. I still had a hell of a job ahead. Politics, funding, science, people who would underestimate me from the moment I spoke. But now I knew I didn't need anyone's permission to lead. The message from my mom, yeah, it meant something. Not because I needed validation, but because it told me the cracks were starting to show. The walls between us weren't down, not even close. But they weren't bulletproof anymore either. I smiled, just a little, then got back to work. It was early spring when I finally made it back to Westbury. I didn't pack much, just a carry-on and a folder of notes for the next phase of the project. I wasn't there to impress anyone, wasn't chasing approval. I just wanted to see if anything had shifted. The house looked the same, shrubs trimmed, porch light working again, same old wind chimes clinking near the kitchen window. Inside, the air felt different, lighter. Dinner was chicken and rice, simple. No one overcooked anything this time. We sat around the table, same spots as always. But the vibe was quieter, calmer. Nobody asked if I was dating. Nobody brought up Amanda's new minivan or how much houses were selling for across town. My dad passed me the bread basket and gave me a nod. "Colonel," that's all he said. No smirk, No jab. Just that. And it landed harder than any apology he could have fumbled through. I gave him a nod back and poured myself some water. Mom leaned in. Do you need anything for your office? I saw a lamp at the store, one of those sleek metal ones. Looked like something you'd use. I'm good, I said, but I smiled. Appreciate it, though. We talked about the rain back in Seattle, the tulips in her garden. Some showed Dad had started watching about national parks. It was almost normal. For once, I wasn't bracing between every bite of food. I didn't have to shrink myself or explain why my job mattered. We just sat and talked, like people, like a family trying, in their own awkward way, to meet somewhere in the middle. No standing ovations, no backhanded compliments, but no side eyes either. When dinner wrapped up, I helped Mom clear the plates. Dad clicked on the TV, and I caught him glancing over like he wanted to say something else. He didn't, but the look was enough. Outside, the night was still. My bag was packed. Uber was 10 minutes out. I stood in the doorway, gave one last wave, and shut the door behind me. As I walked down the front steps, I felt something I hadn't felt here in a long time. Peace. Not because they'd changed, not completely, but because I didn't need them to. I'd already become something they never expected. And now, maybe, they were finally starting to see it.